I'm Sarah Lund, and today I'm interviewing Dave Seyfert, and today is July 20th, 2023. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
It's good to be here with you.
Good to be here, Sarah.
Thank you. Before we start, I was going to just ask about your first memories of First Congregational Church.
First memories. Well, I joined the church in 1980, and my first memories are coming here with my two young daughters. They were about, maybe about 4 and 6. And I was looking for a place to come on a Sunday morning and have them attend a Sunday school and get to know folks. And I remember sitting there in church. Jerry Jordan was our minister, and I remember the brown bag that he would bring to church every Sunday and have the children's sermon. So that brown bag is a memory, and then just all the wonderful people that I met at coffee hour. Lots of good people here.
Okay, that's such a great memory. When and why did you become a member of the church?
Well, as I said, I was looking for a place where I could bring the two girls. As a relatively new father, I was kind of looking for a place to get established in terms of spirituality. And my dad was a UCC minister for his whole career, and so I grew up in the church. Actually, we lived in the church. Our first church lived upstairs until they built a parsonage. So I grew up in the church, always was close to the UCC, but I had kind of drifted away during my college years, hadn't been in church for probably about 10 years. So I was ready to get back in, and First Congregational was the place to be.
That's really neat. And you said Jerry Jordan was the minister at the time that you joined?
Yep. Okay. Jerry was the one who persuaded me to join. As I said, I started visiting and met a lot of good folks at coffee hour, and in those days, you had people coming up at coffee hour. Usually had several offers to join committees when you came to coffee hour.
Okay.
And after several months, decided to join.
Yeah, and did they get you to join a committee right away?
Absolutely. Got drafted into the Christian Education Committee. That was my interest was in education, so started attending those meetings and was focused primarily on adult education, and it was out of that committee work and Jerry Jordan's urging that we began the forum.
So, really? Yes.
Forum's always been near and dear to my heart. It's one of my major interests in First Congregational, and we started that over 40 years ago. A lot of great topics we've discussed in there. The idea was to have a space, have an hour on Sunday morning where we could explore a wide range of topics: theological, spiritual, social justice, science, lots of different range of topics. And you might hear something that you agreed with, you might hear something you disagreed with, but if you came with an open mind and listened and discussed with people, you would definitely learn something. So we had many great programs over the years. Howard Ray took over leading that, and then Ardith Hansen, now Rob Lund, doing a great job of keeping that going. So really proud of the legacy that we have with the forum.
Yeah, still going after 40 years. Yeah. It's really cool. Can you share a memory from your time spent with a team or a committee that was really meaningful to you?
Well, I think when I think back on the 40 plus years that I've been a member, there are many memories, many experiences that I could cite, but I think the one that has kind of stuck in my mind that really, I believe, epitomizes our legacy as a church, and the thoughtfulness and the activism of our congregation would be a rather difficult time, really a divisive time that occurred back in the early 90s. Amendment 2 had been passed in Colorado, which would have deprived people of rights, LGBTQ folks, and it was eventually overturned by the Supreme Court. But largely through the leadership of Jim White at that time, we advocated for marriage equality and open and affirming status as our church. And it was a divisive time, a difficult time, a kind of a dark time that we went through. We lost a number of members. Some of those were good friends and long-term members that were very active and financially generous to the church. So it was a time of uncertainty and difficulty. But we came through that with a lot of people working in different ways and on some different committees to move forward and support marriage equality. And eventually, not long after that, we actually grew as a church, gained lots of new members. People were coming saying that, we heard about your position, your stance on marriage equality, and, we want to be part of this. And many LGBTQ folks joined the church, and we welcomed them. And so I think that stands at the top of my list in terms of thinking back over our history, and that really was a continuation of our legacy as a church and as a denomination. The UCC has been at the forefront of many social justice causes and issues, and that's partly why I remain connected and always will to the UCC and to First Congregational. That's
a really great memory. Thank you. Who do you remember as friends throughout your years here?
I thought that might be a question, and I resisted coming up with a list of names because there's so many folks that I've come to know and love here that are part of the church. And I'm afraid I would leave somebody off that list. I mean, I just don't know how to begin listing people. So, many good people that I've worked with, some are gone, departed, not with us anymore. Some have moved away, some no longer attend, but lots of good people that I've worked with in different committees and continue to do so today. And I would hesitate to single out any small number of folks because I would be limiting myself, and there's a lot of other folks that I wouldn't mention.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is it, as you look back on your time here, what do you value most about this church and this community?
I would say the social justice position that we have, and always trying to seek out the truth and live up to our mission and our values and the gospel message, the inclusivity, the welcoming, the affirming, and really the message of Jesus' teachings that we should reach out to anyone and everyone and love them. And so one of the interests that I've had while I've been here is in historic preservation of our building, and we've had some committees that worked on that and capital campaigns, and we were able to benefit from State Historic Fund matching grants a number of times over the years to be able to restore our building and put on a new roof and renovate the organ, lots of different projects. And some churches, particularly older historic churches, wind up having a real problem with their physical plant and their building because it gets very expensive to maintain an older building and keep it running and keep the utilities working. But I think we've balanced that well and been able to preserve our historic structure and yet use our structure to serve the community. And I think that's a good example of how we balance our values in a way to serve the community, and we've opened our doors many times to other groups to utilize this historic space. And Out Loud would be an example of getting started here, using our sanctuary to practice. The dwelling place has been used by a number of different groups from the community. IHN, or Family Promise, we devote time and space to help unhoused folks have a place to stay here. We've done that for many years. Think back to the 80s, and we hosted a Korean church here for several years. People may not remember that.
Yeah.
And this was a growing young congregation that had just started out, and I remember coming to church on Sunday mornings. It was just an interesting experience because you had this huge group of Korean folks growing every Sunday. They'd have more people. They were using our previous chapel, which used to be the atrium.
Okay.
What's the atrium today was our chapel at that time before some remodeling occurred. And people were coming and going from services that were occurring simultaneously, and that was a divisive issue. We had some people that were, objected to our sponsoring them. They're using our space because that was taking up some space that had been classrooms for our programs. And so I remember a contentious meeting where that was discussed. But it's another example of how we've balanced these different values, really with the intent of serving the community, having this be a community space. In a rather conservative community, we're kind of a beacon of light that speaks from our heart and from our values about social justice and serving others.
Yeah, I agree. And so you've probably shared this a few times, or a few memories, but if you have another in particular, or any favorite memories of First Congregational Church?
I would say the other memory I would share would also be kind of a continuous, ongoing memory. The other passion that I have that relates to First Congregational is folk music. We're known and highly regarded in the community as being a church with a great music program. We've always had that. It continues today. We have many accomplished musicians, a lot of them classically trained, really good program. But one aspect of that is folk music, which is one of my passions, and I think there should always be a place for the music of the folks.
Yeah.
And so we have now, for over 30 years, had an annual folk service that Jim White got started many years ago. And I look forward to those Sundays and other Sundays when we can get out the guitars and sing some of those traditional spirituals, gospel songs, folk songs, protest songs, many of those. And so that's a highlight for me.
Great. Thank you. What advice, Dave, do you have to give to the congregation for going forward into the next 150 years?
I think the best advice and the only advice that I can really offer is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. That really says it all.
I agree. Are there any other specific memories that you'd like to share from First Congregational? Anything
I think we've covered most of my thoughts that I had. I guess what I would say is I won't be around to see the next 150 years, but I can envision 150 years from now, people will be looking back, and I'm hoping that there'll be a lot of great stories to tell.
I'm sure there will be. Great. Well, thank you, Dave.
Thank you. The forum and some of the speakers. Well, again, I would hesitate to mention a specific speaker because there have been so many great speakers over the years and continue to be. Really, the recent years, I think those responsible, Howard, Ardith, and Rob specifically, have really taken the forum to a much higher level than it ever had been previously. But we've had outstanding speakers. One of the things we benefit from is having a close connection to Colorado College, and we have a number of CC professors who are or have been members of First Congregational over the years. So that gave us a relatively easy pipeline to get speakers into the forum, and many of them, I think of Doug Fox, I think of Joe Pickle as a couple of examples, David Gardner, David Weddle, a number of others from CC have been some of our speakers that I think really resonated with folks, drew a pretty good crowd. The one speaker that comes to mind, we had several that were really nationally known, and one that comes to mind was actually one that didn't happen, but then it did happen later. We had a guy from CSU in Fort Collins, Tom Sutherland, was a professor there and had been appointed to a position over in Lebanon back in the 80s, and was kidnapped and held as a captive in Beirut for about 6 years. And Jim White had been a friend and a colleague of his at CSU many years ago. And so when he was released and came back and went on speaking tour and writing about his experience, he was to come here and speak in the forum. That's an example of the type of speaker that we tried to attract. Well, the day he was scheduled to come, we had one of the biggest snowstorms in Colorado history, and he couldn't get down from Fort Collins. So for the first time, and I think the only time in the years that I remember, we didn't have forum that day. But he was able to come later and talk about his experience in Beirut, so that was an interesting topic.
Yeah. They had the yellow ribbons around the trees up at CSU for a long time for him. I remember being up there and seeing it. So it's a neat speaker. Any other particular topics that you really enjoyed in forum?
Well, I think one of the topics that we came back to periodically that really seemed to resonate with a lot of folks, so we covered a number of different books and speakers on this, was kind of the connection between spirituality and oftentimes an Eastern-oriented spirituality. One of the things we did in the forum was talk about other faith traditions quite regularly, and we had several series on world religions, and so Eastern spirituality, Buddhism, and other related kinds of faiths, I think were of great interest, and there were a number of books and speakers who related that to a scientific viewpoint, specifically physics, and some of the connections there between spirituality and physics and science. And I think of there were books by Larry Dossey was an author that we discussed in there. Matthew Fox, another author that we talked about. He had been excommunicated from the Catholic Church. He'd been a priest and got a little bit too outspoken. So fascinating guy. We went, actually, forum folks went up to Denver to hear him speak one time. So that whole thrust of taking a look at spirituality as how it connects to science, and there's so many connections there between the micro approach, looking through a microscope and seeing the smaller world, and then looking through a telescope and looking into space and seeing what's out there, and you know, making those connections between the micro and the macro environment. And today, you know, we have a group working toward creation justice for First Congregational Church. Lots of activities going with that, book discussions, tours, hikes, films, and you know, that's another way that connects the micro to the macro, and that when we think about the environment, it touches everything, and there are social justice implications for that as well. You know, how does climate change affect those who are disadvantaged and those who are living in poverty or who are unhoused, and people live in communities where hazardous waste sites are nearby, and how does that affect their health? So climate and environmental justice really affects everything that we do in many ways that we don't often think about. And so that's one of our objectives with this group that's working toward creation justice, is to kind of open that door and look at what's there and understand it better and become more engaged in concern for stewardship and taking care of our environment.
Yeah. Are you part of that committee as well?
Yes.
Yeah. I was thinking you were. Yeah. Well, great. I really loved hearing about those topics from Forum. Anything else?
Yeah, so the way the folk service got started back in the very early 90s, maybe 90 or 91, Jim White had recently come to be our minister. And so I was on the search committee that called Jim White, and we were a little bit off in terms of our negotiations on salary and compensation. We weren't quite where Jim wanted it to be. Yeah. So to kind of sweeten the deal a little bit, we added a couple of things. One of those was, Jim, will add some moving expenses, pay for your move down here. Well, Jim decided to accept the call and come here. So the moving benefit basically amounted to several of us on the search committee driving to Denver in pickup trucks and loading up Jim's belongings. He had a whole garage full of books, cardboard boxes of books. That's what I remember about that move, was most of it was books. But as we opened the garage to get loaded up, there were 2 guitars in there in cases. And I'm like, wow, Jim, you play the guitar? Oh yeah, I strum a little bit. So at that moment, I sat down and opened one of those. It was a 12-string, and started strumming that. And I said, I think we got the right guy here.
That's great.
So out of that discussion and later discussions, Jim said, why don't we have an annual folk service? And that's how it got started.
Yeah, in his garage.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Yeah, you've given us a lot of good things, good material.
Okay, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.